Yes, we'll start. Okay, fine. So we are actually in a new chapter now on I'll tell you exactly where I'm going to share screen. We're on page 65. We're in chapter 2 of book 11, and we're discussing the chiyuv hatefillah, right? The obligation of tefillah. We spent a lot of time dealing with some of the details, what you can do before tefillah. Today we're actually going to look at the actual obligation itself of tefillah. That's what we're going to be focusing on. Try to work out if there's something else on or not. Don't know. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So it is what it is. Okay. That's tomorrow night. Yeah. Sorry. Even then. Okay. So so we're going to look today at the chiyuv of tefillah, the obligation of tefillah. Okay. So the question we first have to look at is whether there's a chiyuv d'oraita or d'rabanan. There we go. A couple other people looking on. So the question we've got to look at today is whether there's a chiyuv d'oraita or d'rabanan for tefillah. Is there a biblical or any rabbinic obligation to daven? So we're on page 65. Here's 6.1, and the Mishnah in Tanit tells us as follows. The Tanya, hello Jeff, how you doing?
Hi. Hi.
The Tanya, as we learned in the Breita, la'avat Hashem l'kechem u'lovdo b'chol levavchem. So the Gemara in Tanit famously says, Ezehi avodah shebelev. What does it mean to serve with all your heart? What is avodah shebelev? Have omer zo tefillah. Okay, so that seemed to imply that tefillah is d'oraita because we're learning it from the pasuk in Torah, la'avat Hashem l'kechem u'lovdo b'chol levavchem. And indeed, this is the way that Rambam rules. Rambam, Maimonides, holds that this is a genuine limud and that there is a mitzvah in HaTorah to daven every day. And he counts it here in source 2 in the Sefer HaMitzvah, the 5th mitzvah that he counts, 5th positive mitzvah. But mitzvah chamishit, the 5th mitzvah, he shetzivanu la'ovdo yit'aleh. There's a command to serve God. It's this command has been repeated numerous times. Amar, it says in Pasha Mishpatim, Va'avadtem et Hashem Lakechem, you shall serve Hashem your God. Va'amar, and also in Pasha Re'eh, Va'otot ta'avodu, him you shall serve. Va'amar also says Ve'et Chanan, Va'otot ta'avod, Va'amar ula'ovdo. It also says in Pasha Ekev, ula'ovdo, and to serve him. So Rambam holds it's a mitzvah d'oraisa to daven every day. Ve'afal pi shezehat sivoy, who gam came in at sivoyim hakolelim, even though this is a commandment, is a general one, because the Rambam has the Sefer HaShorashim, or rather he has the Shorashim in the beginning of his Sefer HaMitzvot. He has different Shorashim, different principles, roots literally, but principles where he talks about how you get to 613 and how you count them. So he discusses elsewhere that it's a mitzvah kolel, and therefore, nonetheless, there's this general mitzvah to serve God, but hinei yesh bo yichud. There's something unique about it. Shehu siva b'tfilah, which is the commandment to daven, to pray, and therefore it merits its own mitzvah. That avodah, according to the Rambam, and specifically tefillah, is one of the 630 mitzvot, and there's a mitzvah d'oraita to daven every day. The number of tefillot we'll see is probably midrabanan, but nonetheless there is a mitzvah in a Torah, according to Rambam, to daven every single day. That was the opinion of Rambam, based on that Gemara and Tanit and elsewhere. However, others disagree. The Ramban disagreed in his Hasagot, right? In the Hasagot, how do they translate it? The gloss, or whatever terrible translation they had. What do they call it? The glosses. Okay, Hasagot means lahasig. Doesn't really mean that. It means you argue. It's not notes, it's arguments, right, against it. So critiques. So in the Ramban's Hasagot, Ramban disagrees that there's a mitzvah d'oraisa and says that the whole idea of tefillah every day is wholly midrabanan. There's no chiyuv d'oraita. He says in source 3 as follows: Hasagot haRamban mitzvah say, ve'ein haskama b'zeh. I don't agree with this. Shekva be'aruch chachamim b'gemara tefillah d'rabanan. Chazal already said tefillah is d'rabanan. Kamosha amru b'shlishi shel brachot, the third parak of Masechet Brachot, we learn that tefillah is d'rabanan le'inyan bal keri shekara kriyat shema u'mavarech al mazon acharav. The Einam it's Palel, right? We know that there was a time, there was a Gezerah decree that a Baal Keri, somebody who had a ceremonial omission, was not allowed to recite Brachot and Divrei Torah. They were only allowed to do d'oraita things like say Shema until they went to the mikveh and benching. But they couldn't Einam it's Palel, right? And the reason, the He'elu Tam Bazeh, and the Gemara gives the reason why is that they weren't allowed to daven, but they were allowed to say Kriyat Shema and bench. The Gemara there said, because Ella Kriyat Shema Birkat Hamazon d'oraita, Tefillah d'Rabbanan. So Ramban picks up the fact that Tefillah is d'Rabbanan according. Sorry, Peter, I'm just going to mute you. Okay, so just to recap for those who came in, and quite a few people came in virtually, there is a machloket as to whether, when discussing tefillah itself, the obligation of tefillah is a d'oraita d'Rabbanan. So Rambam, Maimonides, holds this mitzvah d'oraita to daven every day. The number of tefillah is d'Rabbanan, whereas Ramban, in his Hasagot, in source 3 here on page 66, disagrees and says tefillah is only d'Rabbanan. They both have difficulties. The Rambam has to contend with the Gemara, which the Ramban just quoted, because the Gemara says a Baal Keri doesn't daven in the times where there was a Gezerah that had to go to the mikveh, because tefillah is d'Rabbanan, and that phrase is quite explicit, tefillah d'Rabbanan. So what does Rambam do with that phrase? Because he says tefillah is d'oraita. So Rambam will answer that tefillah d'Rabbanan means the 3 amidas a day are only d'Rabbanan. There's a mitzvah in a Torah to daven every day. The rabbi said do it 3 times a day in this fashion. The chiyuv is d'oraita, but the way you daven is that the text is d'Rabbanan. To daven 3 times a day is d'Rabbanan, and that's how Rambam would answer this Gemara. What about the proofs for Rambam against Ramban? The Torah says, the Gemara in Masechet Tanit says, what is avodah shebelev? It's tefillah. So the Ramban, he says it's what we call an asmachta ba'alma. It's just like a support from the Psukim. It doesn't mean literally that the Psukim are actually telling us there is a mitzvah asay called tefillah. So whereas Rambam says it's a mitzvah d'oraita to daven, Ramban says tefillah, the whole idea of tefillah is only d'Rabbanan. However, Ramban does concede there is one type of tefillah which is d'oraita, and that is what is called tefillah ba'et sarah, tefillah in a time of need or a time of distress. Then Rambam says, Ramban agrees with Rambam, but there's a mitzvah d'oraita to daven. If we look in the continuation of the Ramban's Western Source 4, he says, right, the drasha, which is also the drasha in the Gemara and Tanit, that to serve God means tefillah. Asmachta here, it's just an asmachta, it's a support, but it's not actually d'oraita. Or alternative, lomar, is to tell you, shemiklal ha'avodah shenilmad Torah, included in the avodas that we should learn Torah, v'shenit palel elav be'eit hatzarot. He concedes that tefillah be'eit tzara, tefillah at time of distress, is d'oraita. That our eyes and hearts should be towards God, like servants to their masters. In other words, Ramban agrees that tefillah be'eit tzara is d'oraita. And this we learn from elsewhere. This we learn from the parasha of Chatzotzrot in Parasha Halotcha. This is what Ramban goes on to say. This is what it says in the Torah in Parasha Halotcha. When you come to war in your land, El Hatzar Hatzaret, when the oppressor comes and torments you, V'harei otem b'chatzotzrot, you should blow the trumpets, V'nizkartem lifnei Hashem Elokeichem, and you should be remembered before Hashem. So Ramban explains that is a mitzvah d'oraita. V'hi mitzvah al kol tzara v'tzara shetavo ala tzibur, any distress or time of great distress which comes on the community, there's a mitzvah min haTorah, litzok lefanav b'tefillah, to cry out before Hashem in tefillah. So Ramban concedes there is one type of tefillah which is d'oraita. That is what is known as tefillah be'eit tzara, tefillah at a time of distress. But regular tefillah, daily tefillah, is only all rabbinic in terms of its obligation. So those psukim, you're right. So what does it mean? V'niz karatem l'fnei Hashem, you'd remember before Hashem. So I have a whole vault. I don't know, those of you who cast your minds back around 12 months, if you can. I gave a share on Zoom before Yom Kippur to Mizrahi, and I spoke about Ne'ilah. I spoke about while still in Israel, and you didn't have Ne'ilah. And I spoke about the difference between tefillah and tefillah be'eit tzara. And these were actually some of the things which came up. That Ne'ilah is part of what we call the system of tefillah be'eit tzara. It's not regular tefillah, it's tefillah be'eit tzara, it's tefillah at time of distress. We see this in a few ways. But Ne'ilah is something that they would daven on the Taniyot, the fast days that they would fast when there was no rain, when there was a drought. They would also daven Ne'ilah. They would declare public fast day. They daven Ne'ilah, and they'd go out to the street and daven, if you like. Whereas your daily Amida is part of the mechanism of Masechet Brachot. This tefillah, which Rambam is saying is d'oraita, is part of the mechanism of Masechet Ta'anit. It's a different type of tefillah. So whereas Masechet Brachot, Ramban says that's sort of daily tefillah of Rabbanan, this tefillah be'eit tzara, when we cry out on the Ne'ilah, that is d'oraita, and that is Masechet Ta'anit, not Masechet Brachot, if you like, in terms of looking at the nature of the tefillah. Okay. There's other halachot about Ne'ilah which seem to imply this, but that's for another time. Okay. So there's a general dispute between Rambam and Ramban as to whether tefillah in general is d'oraita or d'Rabbanan. Rambam says d'oraita, Ramban says it's d'Rabbanan. However, they both agree that the text that we use is from the Anshe Knesset HaGadola, and that is d'Rabbanan. And the Gemara Masechet Brachot discusses the text. It's in the fifth chapter of Masechet Brachot, here in source 5, Brachot Lamed Gimel, where the Gemara actually discusses the text. It says as follows in source 5, Amalei Rav Shimon bar Abba Rabbi Yochanan. Says Rav Shimon bar Abba Rabbi Yochanan, Mechti Anshe Knesset HaGadola Tifnu Lehem L'Yisrael, since the Amida was instituted for Israel by the Anshe Knesset HaGadola. Over the page. 1 second. Yeah, top of page 67. Since what did they institute? Brachot, utfilot, kedushot, v'havdalot. Brachos, the Amidas, Kiddush, and Havdalah, basically. This is what they instituted for Am Yisrael. Kedushot does not refer to the Kedusha. The Kedusha, the form that we have it, is an enactment of the Gaonim. But it means Kiddush in contrast to Havdalot. In other words, the Gemara itself explicitly talks about the fact that Anshe Knesset HaGadola are the ones who wrote the Shemona Esrei. And when did they live? Anshe Knesset HaGadola. So they lived the first half of Bayit Sheni. So they lived this first half of the Second Temple era. That's when the Anshe Knesset HaGadolah lived. So, because we know that Shimon HaTzadik was Mishayarei Knesset HaGadolah, was one of the, we learn in first Perek Pirkei Avot, he was one of the last of the Anshe Knesset HaGadolah. And there's a machloket in Mechkar, in academia, there's a machloket as to who Shimon HaTzadik was. Is Shimon HaTzadik, is he the Shimon who from the time of the Chashmonaim, which is in the 2nd century BCE, or is it a bit earlier than that? But either way, if he was the end of the Anshe Knesset HaGadolah, we're talking here the first half of the Second Temple period is when the Shemona Esrei, as we know it, was originally enacted, which is why they find shuls at the times of Bayit Sheni, because they already had a fixed text, even though they had a Beit HaMikdash. So they were the ones who originally wrote it, but the Gemara Masechet Megillah, as well as Brachot, but they quote Megillah in Surah 6, expands on the story a bit about that. We had a text and then it was lost. We look at Surah 6 to Tanya, because we learn in the Braita, Shimon HaPakuli, histir Shmona Esrei Brachot lifnei Rabban Gamliel al HaSeder b'Yavna. Shimon HaPakuli is the one who arranged these brachot in front of Rabban Gamliel at Yavna. To which the Gemara says, what do you mean? We just learned the Gemara in Brachot, that they lived at the end of the post-temple destruction. And we said that it was earlier. Since 120 men of the assembly, Mehem Kamanavim, including Navim, Tiknu Tfilah ala Seder, already arranged the order of the Amida. Shimon HaPakuli, my history. What if Shimon HaPakuli, who lived a few centuries later, did? So the Gemara says, Shachachum v'chazar v'sidrum. They'd forgotten them, and then they came and rearranged them. In other words, Shimon HaPakuli basically revived the Amida, which was lost over time. Kind of shows you the spiritual state that they were in the second half of Bayit Sheni, that everyone had forgotten Amida, right? And then they needed Shimon HaPakuli to come and rearrange it again. So they were doing these tefillot, but it seems they'd forgotten, and then it was reorganized. This is in parallel to Korbanot, right? Even though we say that they correspond to the Korbanot, we know that the Amida already in Bayit Sheni, when there was Beit HaMikdash, was already enacted by the Anshe Knesset HaGadolah. So the question is, though, how could they forget the Amida? So different, right? What does that mean? It shows you the spiritual state they were in. But there are different explanations. But one of them is that it's not that they actually forgot it; they just forgot the order of the brachot. Don't forget, they didn't have Sidurim. Everyone was reading Baal Peh, and the order was marred basically. And that can be implied from the fact it says Shachachum v'chazar v'sidrum. He reorganized it, right? It's not that he rewrote it, but he didn't rewrote it. He reorganized it basically, the official text of the Amida. And that's what he did. But either way, the original text is from the beginning of Bayit Sheni, from the Anshe Knesset HaGadolah's times, in the first half of Bayit Sheni. And this is how Rambam himself says in Surah 7 in his Hilchot Tefillah. He explains why they needed it. Because don't forget, according to the Rambam, Min HaTorah, you just have to daven. Chazal are the ones who gave a fixed formula, which is our Amida. So in Surah 7 says the Rambam Hilchot Tefillah, Kivan shegalo Yisrael b'meir Nebuchadnezzar. Once Israel were exiled, in the days of Nebuchadnezzar HaRasha, Nit Arvu b'Paras v'Yavam, we got mixed up in Persia and Greece, v'Sha'ar HaAmot, and all the other nations. V'noldu lehem banim ba'arsat hagoyim. Right? We were chutznikim. We were born outside the land of Israel. V'otana banim nit balbalu sfatam. And now we got confused with our mother tongue. V'haita sfat kol echad ve'echad mu'urevet l'shonot harbeh. None of us spoke Hebrew as the first language anymore, and our languages all got mixed up. When somebody would speak, on page 67, discussing tefillah. So yeah, and it's all 7, page 67. Right? No one could speak eloquently, sort of articulate their needs in a normal fashion, because it says they didn't know how to speak, right? They didn't know how to speak Hebrew, right? And that was the situation they were in. When they came back basically for Bayit Sheni, they didn't know how to speak Hebrew properly. Because of this, what do you do if you can't speak the language? You speak as little as possible. So tiktsar l'shana, he'd speak very briefly, Lishal Chafkatzav, to ask for his needs, or Lahagid Shevach HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Lashon HaKodesh, or to praise Hashem in Hebrew, Ad She'arvu Ima Lashonot Acherot, until he would be muddled up. So Rambam's explaining the history that it used to be that you could formulate the way you wanted the Amidah, but then when people couldn't speak Hebrew, they couldn't do it properly, and their tefillot weren't particularly long. Over the page, top of page 68, the Kivan Shera'a Ezra Ubeit Dinokach, once Ezra and his Beit Din saw this, Amdu v'tiknu lehem shmona esrei brachot al haseder, they are the ones who came and enacted the Amidah as we know it, the Shmona Esrei, right? And therefore, in order to ensure that people know how to daven properly, okay? And that's what he explains here. Shalosh Rishonot Shevach, the first three brachos of praise, La Hashem, Shlosh Acharonot Hodaya, the last three brachos are thanksgiving, the Emsa'iyot Yeshem Sheilat Kol Hadvarim, and the middle brachos, we request our needs, Shehein Komot Avot L'Kol Chavtzei Ish V'ish, they're basically the needs for each and every person, L'Tzarkei Tzibur Kulan, and the needs for the community, Kadesh Yeh Aruchot B'fi HaKol. The idea of having a fixed text was not meant to limit us, but rather was meant to help us, that we now know how to daven properly, so that it should be laid out clear in the mouths of everybody. That these tefillot of those who are unable to speak properly should be a proper tefillah, like tefillah of people who have eloquent speech. And because of this, and it was because of this that they did this brachos and tefillot, so they could be recited through all of Israel, so that it should be recited by somebody who's unable to express himself. And therefore they fixed the text in order to ensure that people could daven properly post Chorban Bayit Rishon. Okay, so but it wasn't just that it's a fixed text. But as here we see in the Nefesh HaChaim, Chaim of Volozhin explains that as the Gemara itself had said, that among the Anshe Knesset HaGadol already, because it was still the beginning of Bayit Sheni, they had Nevi'im, right? And therefore, the Nevi'im knew how to, well, they were Nevi'im. So that means that the Tefillah is particularly elevated. And the various nuances and details of the Tefillah have special kochot, have special power and meaning, because Nevi'im are among the Anshe Knesset HaGadol. And this is what the Nefesh HaChaim expands on here in source 8. He says, "V'amaskil yavin midato." Intelligent person can understand on his own. Shelo lechinam hitzruchu letikun tchina ktana. There's a reason. It wasn't for nothing. There was a certain reason why this small tefillah, tchila ktana tefillah katzar kazomer v'esheres kenim. Why they did this particular short, concise tefillah. Mehem Kamanavim. Among them, there were several prophets. They understood, they perceived with their Ruach HaKodesh, and the capability of their Nevuah, which is supreme. All the paths of the order of creation became illuminated, illuminated for them. In other words, being Nevi'im, they knew how to be mitkaven to what Hashem wanted. And therefore, the tefillah has particular milah, particular level. That's why they are the ones who formulated the framework of the brachot, tefillot, and the prayers, in these specific words. They saw the basically powers and the abilities of each individual word that they used. The whole text is precise. Everything which is meant for basically whatever this means, riboy ha'alamat, for fixing the upper worlds and the multiple worlds. In other words, by having Nevi'im be the authors of, or among the authors of the Amidah, it ensures that we have the best possible text that we have, and therefore the text is particularly virtuous. This is what the Nefesh HaChaim explains. It wasn't just a convenience thing to make sure that we know how to daven, even though Hebrew is not our mother tongue. But also, the tefillah itself was enacted with Nevi'im, and therefore it has all the various kochot and kavanot, which are required in addressing Hashem. Okay, but why 3 tefillot? Why did Chazal come and say 3 tefillot? So it's a bit misleading. I don't want to say anything bad, but this source is a bit misleading, because I saw they quoted in the Gemara and Kavav, but to the best of my recollection, they've only quoted half of the Gemara. So we'll read their half, and then I'll fill in the other half. So in source 9, the Gemara Brachot Vav Tez, why do we have 3 tefillot? It's corresponding to the 3 avot, Abraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov, right? So source 9, Abraham tiken tefillat shacharit. Abraham is one instituted shacharit. Shneimar, as it says, Vayashkem Abraham baboker el makom asher amad. Suddenly he woke up early to the place where he stood. So Abraham is the one who got up early and done shacharit. And how do we know that he stood means that he davened? So over the page, Ve'ein amida el tefillah. Amida, standing up, means in prayer. Shneimar, as it says, Vayamod pinchas vayifalel, that he stood up and davened. So the implication is that he got up early and davened. So yeah, Abraham davened shacharit. Yitzchak tiken tefillat mincha. How do we know Yitzchak davened mincha? Shneimar, as it says, Vayetze Yitzchak lasuach basadel if not erev. He went lasuach. What does lasuach mean? He used to converse, has sicha, right? Ve'ein sicha el tefillah. How do we know that sicha, conversation, means prayer? Shneimar, because it says, he quotes from Tehillim, tefillah le'ani ki ya'tof. That a tefillah for the poor person when he's wrapped up, he's engulfed, basically. V'lifnei Hashem yishpoch sicha. Before God, he pours forth his siach. So siach and lasuach means prayer, his discourse, right? It basically means, right? Sicha in modern Hebrew is a talk, right? So I don't like that translation. I know they're taking it from Quran, but look, that's not what Tehillim there means. V'lifnei Hashem yishpoch sicha means that you've got this poor person who's engulfed. Also, the ya'atof they translated as faint, maybe, but it means that they're surrounded, basically. Litatef batzitzit. That you're engulfed in your sorrows, right? But it's got all too much for you, and therefore yishpoch sicha, he pours forth his siach, his discourse. He's got this whole speech, which just comes all pouring out, right? And that's what lasuach basadeh means. He went to pour it out. 3, Yaakov tiken tefillat arvit. Yaakov instituted Ma'ariv. Shneimar, it says, Vayifga b'makom vayalem sham. He happened upon the place and he slept there, which is when he hit, in Beit El, right, in the dream of the ladder. The ain pagia el tefillah. Pagia, happening upon, means davening. Shneimar, as it says, Va'ata al titpalel ba'ada amazeh. Don't daven for this people. Va'al tisab ba'adam rinav tefillah va'al tifga bi. Right, do not happen upon me. In other words, don't daven for them. And therefore, what do we see from there? Yaakov daven Ma'ariv. So that's what the Gemara says. The Gemara says, why do we do 3 tefillot? Because Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. But as I said, that's only half the story. If you actually look at the full Gemara there, Brachot, that's only one opinion. There's Machloket and the Tanaim there as to why do we daven 3 tefillot. So this is only like one opinion. One opinion in the Gemara is tefillot avot tiknu, that the forefathers instituted them. There's another opinion in the Gemara there. Not this. This is only one side. The other side says not avot tiknum, but tefillot keneged tmidim tiknum, right? Which is the more famous one. That we have tefillot corresponding to the tmidim, to the daily offerings. Shacharit points the morning offering. Mincha points the afternoon offering. The Tamid Shabbein Harabayim, and Ma'ariv was corresponding to the Hekdei Varim, the burning of the limbs and the fats, which was done at night. And therefore, that's that. It's not the avot, but that's the other opinion. Now, ironically, even though they quoted this one, the Rambam in Hilchot Tefillah brings like the other opinion. The Tefillot, he doesn't quote the avot. He brings like the other opinion. It corresponds to the offerings and the burning of the leftovers at night. Actually, in Hilchot Malachim, Perek Tet, if I recall correctly, there the Rambam brings the history of the avot, but in Hilchot Tefillah he doesn't. So the answer is Shnei Dinim, right? They're both true. But that supports the Rambam's position as well. If korbanot are d'oraita, right, could be, yeah. But what's fascinating is the Rambam himself doesn't mention the avot in Hilchot Tefillah. So even though they mentioned it in source 9, I'm happy with them. I left out the other source with what the Rambam brings. But I'm allowed to be angry. Just don't report back. Because all right, they'll stop sending us books. So yeah. Okay.
But also the fact that Ma'ariv is semi-voluntary and not the same as the other two also supports Rambam, because the burning of the Ma'ariv was like
the Hekder Chalavim, the Hekder Ivarim at night.
If you didn't have any leftovers, you wouldn't have to burn them.
Right.
Yeah.
So well, we will stay out of the whole episode there with, if you want to look it up in the 4th parak of Brachot between Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua about what happened where Rabbi Yeshua said it was Arvit was only a reshut, and Rabban Gamliel said it's a chover, it's an obligation, and in the end Rabban Gamliel made Rabbi, who was head, the Nasi, made Rabbi Yeshua stand up all day and then they demoted Rabban Gamliel, and the whole story about, then what do? They have to, then they had to bring him back, and they appointed Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and then they used to share the position. It's the whole story there, but it starts on this, whether Arvit is a chova or a reshut. And perhaps the two sources, whether it's Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov versus the korbanot, could explain why one is a chova and one is a reshut. Okay, so this is one side of the argument. By the way, if maybe I'll just add, why not? Because why not? I think that the three, if we go back, we look at that source again, the three, I really think a nice idea could be seen about the three avot. Their tefillot correspond to different types of tefillah. Abraham's tefillah was vaya'amod. It was formal standing before Hashem, right? It was right. Vayashkem Avraham b'boker vaya'amod, and he stood. It was to stand up before Hashem. It was like formal service. That's one type of prayer. Yitzchak's tefillah was lasuach basadeh. He went out to the sadeh. Well, we know Abraham is compared to the har, and Yitzchak's sadeh, and Yaakov is the bayit. But Yitzchak went out lasuach basadeh, to converse. He went out to look for that sicha, for that dialogue. And the pasuk from Tehillim that it quotes, "V'lifnei Hashem yishpoch sicha," that he pours forth his siach, his discourse. He went out to look for that conversation, to converse. Lasuach, he went out looking to the field, looking for meaning. It wasn't like a formal avoda like Abraham was vaya'amod, but rather he went out lasuach. He went for a sicha. He went to seek out Hashem. Went looking for meaning. And Yaakov is a third model of tefillah. It's not the formal vaya'amod of Abraham. It's not the lasuach basadeh of Yitzchak, going out, the guy who goes out to nature looking to meet God, but rather the opposite. Vayifga b'makom. He happened upon the place. It was spontaneous, right? He happened upon Be'el when he was running away from Esau. Vayifga, he happened upon it. It was spontaneous, and it came just like from the moment. And therefore, that's another type of model. So in the three avot, we also I think when you learn this Gemara in Brachot, you really see three different models of tefillah: the formal amida, the lasuach, the one who goes out looking for God, and then there's the vayifka, so he happens upon it and finds that moment of spontaneity where they want to daven to Hashem. So I think that's also something special about these three things. That's just my little bit to add to this Gemara, which I think can give it extra meaning. When we look not only at three avot, but three models of tefillah that the avot represent in this Gemara. Okay, that's my couple of cents. All right. Okay. If we look at source 10, he quotes here Rav Malamed in the Pnei Halacha that it's also, I don't know why they quoted in the Pnei Halacha, because I said it's explicit in the Gemara, but basically he says the same thing again, but that also the tefillot correspond to the korbanot. But he adds here at the end of source 10, what's the reason that we correspond to korbanot, according to the other opinion? Because they set up to express the inner significance of a korban. That basically you're giving of yourself to Hashem, which is what a korban is about, and that's what tefillah is meant to be about, that you're giving of yourself. That is a little bit about tefillah. Sorry. Right, so we know historically they already done the Amida during Bayit Sheni. So, right, so it wasn't in place of korbanot, but that's why the Gemara says Kneged T'midim Tiknu, corresponding to, not Bimkom. And that's how I said. So I don't know why they didn't bring the Gemara here, but I brought it anyway. So, yeah, Magid shares privilege. So, okay, all right. So let's have a look now at Chiyuv Nashim, because there's a big question about how many tefillot women are obligated in. Firstly, the Mishnah seems to be quite clear in the Mishnah in Brachot, the women are obligated in tefillah. We look at source 11 here, the Mishnah in Brachot. Nashim va'avadim u'ktanim p'turim mikriyat shema u'min tefillah. So women and avadim and minors are obviously exempt from kriyat shema and u'min tefillin, and from tefillin, because they're both time-bound mitzvot. Presumably that would be the reason. We'll see in a minute. There's a discussion about that. V'chayavin b'tefillah. Women are obligated in davening, uvim zuzah, and in mezuzah, ubibirkat hamazon, and in benching. Why are women chayavim in tefillah? Surely it is a mitzvah aseh shehaz magrama. You're supposed to daven every day, and therefore it's a positive time by mitzvah. Women should be exempt. Why does the Mishnah in source 11 say women are obligated in tefillah? This is one of the big questions, and there's a dispute in the Rishonim as to exactly what the answer is. So first, let's have a look at Rashi. Before we get to Rashi, we've got to look at this this source 12 here, this little piece of Gemara, which discusses it in Brachot. So in source 12, the Gemara deals with that Mishnah and says, why is it they're obligated in tefillah? The Gemara explains that because tefillah are rachamei. They are mercy. In other words, the nature of tefillah is davening for our mercy. In which case, even though strictly speaking, one might argue it would be meant to be time-bound, nonetheless, since it's rachamei, Chazal obligated women to do it. And that is how Rashi understands. We'll see Rashi in a minute. Mahudutema, you might have said, since it says regarding tefillah, quoting here from Tehillim, that I daven evening, morning, and noon. It's like a positive time-bound mitzvah, in which case women should be exempt. Kamash malam. Therefore, the Mishnah comes to teach us otherwise that women are chayav in tefillah. So Rashi understands this to mean that even though it is a time-bound mitzvah, and strictly speaking, women are exempt, Chazal rabbinically obligated them in tefillah because it's rachameh. Because it's davening for supplication, davening for your needs, and therefore women should also be davening. This is how Rashi understands in source 13. The chayavim b'tefillah, the obligated in tefillah, the tefillah rachamehi, tefillah is rachamim, it's davening for mercy. Umidrabananhi, and it's rabbinically obligated. V'tiknua afle nashim, and Chazal instituted it also for women, v'lachanoch tanim, and even for children, there's a mitzvah of davening. So Chazal are the ones who instituted tefillah, and they instituted it for women as well. That is the position of Rashi. Even though you would think as a mitzvah asher shehasman grama, tefillah is an exception because it is rachamei, and therefore it was important to Chazal that women should also daven for themselves. Okay, that's how Rashi reads. The Rif and the Rambam give a different explanation. They say women, because don't forget, Rif and Rambam hold that there's a Torah obligation to daven tefillah, right? And they say the reason women are obligated is it's simply not a time-bound mitzvah. Why? How is it not a time-bound mitzvah? We'll explain. But let's first see the Rif inside the source 14. The Rif says here
because Rambam said that tefillah is not time-bound. Tefillah is an obligation. The Rabbanan made a mitzvah of when to do it, but the inherent obligation is not time-bound.
Correct. Right. So we're going to see that in the Rambam's words himself in a moment. And then we'll look at that there. But yeah, that's the basic direction. So unlike Rashi, who says in theory it would be time-bound, but Chazal obligated women because of the virtues of tefillah, because it's rachamim. The alternative position is that of the Rif and the Rambam, which is just that it's not time-bound, which we'll see that inside in a moment. Let's just first look at the full 14 in the Rif. Kriyat Shema Tefillin Dehavale Mitzvah Ashes Hazra Grammar. So Shema and Tefillin are time-bound. The Kol Mitzvah Ashes Hazman Grammar Nashim Turot. And women are therefore exempt from them. Whereas tefillah mezuzah or birkat hamazon, the havale mitzvah aseh shelo hazman grama, these are not time bound. The whole mitzvah aseh shelo hazman grama nashim chayavot, and therefore any mitzvah which are not time bound, women are obligated in. By the way, a little bit of trivia: not only tefillah is not time bound, but also mezuzah and birkat hamazon. Why are they not time bound? Because they're not time-bound, they're circumstantially bound, however you use the phrase. It's not shehasman grammar, but it's rather matzav grammar. The sort of situation causes it. If you have a house, you're obligated in a mezuzah. If you don't have a house, you're not obligated in a mezuzah. If you've eaten bread, you have to bench. If you haven't eaten bread, you don't have to bench. So it's not time-bound. It's not based on the calendar or the time of day, but it's based on the situation. And therefore, women are obligated in these mitzvot as well. So the question is, why tefillah? So as Peter pointed out, and the Rambam expands upon this in source 15, since there's not actually a mitzvah to daven 3 times a day, it's a mitzvah to daven basically all day, every day, a constant mitzvah to daven to Hashem. The rabbis are the one who said daven 3 amidas, but midoraita, it's just a mitzvah to daven every day, constantly. In which case, it's not time bound, and therefore women are obligated. Let's see the Rambam inside as he explains his mahalach, his thesis in source 15. Says the Rambam. This is how he opens his Hilchot Tefillah. Mitzvah asay hit palel b'chol yom. There is a mitzvah to pray every day. Shneimar, as it says, va'avadtem et Hashem lekechem, you shall serve Hashem your God. B'pnei Shmuah Amru, we've learned from tradition, she'avodah zohi tefillah. This service of God means davening. Shneimar, and it also says ulo ovda b'chol b'avchem, serve him with all your heart. Amru Chachamim, Eizo hi avodah shebalev zot tefillah. What is the service of the heart? Davening. Ve'et minyan hatfilot, ve'ein minyan hatfilat min Torah. There is no number of tefillot you have to daven min Torah. V'lo mishneh hatfilah hazot min Torah, nor is the text, the teaching of this tefillah biblical. Ve'ein letefillah zman kavua min Torah. There's no fixed time. So Rambam's showing us it's not a time-bound endeavor. There's just a constant mitzvah to daven. Every day you're supposed to daven. Same way you're supposed to serve Hashem, you're supposed to daven. And halacha bet, lufikach, and therefore nashim va'avadim chayavim b'tefillah. Women and avadim are obligated in tefillah. Lefisha hi mitzvah aseisha lo hazman grama, because it's not time bound. Elachiyuv mitzvah zo kachu. Rather, what is the obligation of the mitzvah of davening? Sheyehei adam mitchanem umitpalel bechol yom. A person should daven for himself and beseech every day. Umagid shivchol shel kadosh baruch hu, and say God's praises. V'acharkach, and afterwards sha'al tzrachav, then afterwards ask for his personal needs. Should tzarich lehem b'bakasha v'tchina, which he needs through requesting and supplication. V'acharkach, and then to end off, noten shevach v'odei al Hashem al tova sheyishbi'a lo, to give praise and thanks to Hashem for the good that he has done. Kol echad ve'echad k'fi kocho, each person according to his capability. But nonetheless, there is no time frame for tefillah. You're just supposed to daven every day. And therefore, the Rambam argues it's not time-bound, and therefore women are obligated. And halacha l'maisa, women are obligated in tefillah. The question is, how many? And that's what we're going to discuss now. How many tefillot are women obligated in? So first, let's look at source 16 here. Shulchan Aruch. Nashim va'avadim she'af al pi she'pturim mikriyat shema chayavim b'tefillah. Women and avadim, even though they're exempt from shema, are obligated in tefillah. Mipnei shehi mitzvah asay shelo hazman grama, because it is a non-time-bound mitzvah. So this would imply that women are basically established on the biblical premise of tefillah. You've got to daven every day. It's not time-bound. And therefore, one could argue that it's enough for women to daven tefillah once a day. And that is what the Magen Avraham seems to have held, that it's enough that women daven once a day. This is the famous position of the Magen Avraham, which Jewish women have been relying on for, many Jewish women have been relying on for generations. We look in source 17. Cain cut off a Rambam, so wrote the Rambam. Dispute related to tefillah mitzvah. I say, Deraitahi, says Magen Avraham. Rambam held tefillah as biblical. Dichtivu la'avda b'chol vavchem. Ach midoraita, but min haTorah, biblically, dai b'pam echad, or it should be achad, whatever. We'll leave the Achronim's grammar for another time. Dai b'pam achat b'chol b'yom uv'chol nusach she'yir. It's enough to daven once a day in any formulation one needs. You don't have to daven a fixed text. And therefore, explains the Magen Avraham, nahagu rov nashim she'ein mitpalalot b'tmidut mishum de'omrim miyad b'boker samach l'natila eza bakasha. That's why there's this long-standing practice and a custom that women don't really daven, because in the morning they say some form of davening, some sort of bakasha. U'midaraita dai b'zeh. And in a Torah, that's enough. The efshon, it's possible, shagam chachamim lo chiyuvum yoter. Could be that Chazal never obligated women to do more than that. They say some sort of form of bakasha and davening every day, besides for brachot. And this is what women seem to rely on, and the Magen Avraham is trying to justify the minhag. Certainly mothers and people who have kids at home, like this is like the common practice, one tefillah a day. And this comes from the Magen Avraham's rationale based on the Rambam. It said that midoraita, got to daven every day. And maybe Chazal said that's enough for women, and only the men have to daven 3 times a day. This is so we're relying on for many generations on this Magen Avraham in source 17. That's the explanation we've been relying on. However, the Mishnah Berurah doesn't seem to like it. In source 18, the Mishnah Berurah says, Kol zeh ladat Rambam. That's all according to the Rambam. Sharak zmanei tefillah he midivrei sofrim aval ikar mitzvah tefillah he min haTorah. That nonetheless, that's only saying because he says that only the time of tefillah is rabbinic, but the mitzvah is biblical to daven every day. That is just the opinion of the Rambam. Over the page to page 73, he says, "V'chatav Magen Avraham," and he quotes the Magen Avraham and says that's the meaning. I'll skip to this on page 73 to the second paragraph, beginning Aval. Do you see it? Aval. That was all the Rambam. Aval dat Ramban. But we already saw the Ramban disagreed, right? What did the Ramban say? Dat Ramban, she'ika mitzvah tefillah hi b'divrei sofrim, right? Remember the Ramban had argued the whole idea of tefillah is only rabbinic, Shehem Anshe Knesset HaGedolah Tiknu Yud Chet Brachot. The men of the Great Assembly are the ones who instituted the 18 brachos ala seder in order. But you have to daven Shachris and Mincha every day, and Mariv was a reshut, voluntary. V'afal pishu mitzvot aseh midivrei sofrim shazman grama v'hanashim peturat mikol mitzvot aseh shazman grama. Even though, according to the Ramban, it was a rabbinic time-bound mitzvah, because don't forget, for the Ramban, the rabbis the one who made up the whole thing, and they made it time-bound, and therefore women should be exempt. Afilim midivrei sofrim, even with rabbinic things, they should be exempt. Who go on Kiddush Halavana, like Kiddush Halavana, which women are exempt from. Afal pi chen, even so, chiyuvu otom b'tfilat shacharit u'mincha. We saw the Gemara had said that they obligate women with shacharit and mincha, kamo anashim, like men. Because davening is requesting mercy, in which case women are obligated in tefillah, and therefore the Mishnah Berurah rules. This is really the real psak. He came down Rav HaPoskin. This is what most people say. That's what the Shagat Aryeh rules. Al-Ken, therefore, Yeshla has here nashim sheet halalu yudchet. You should instruct women to daven Amida. Women should daven the Amida. And he goes on, if we skip to that next paragraph, we'll skip the paragraph after it. He also says this is Shema, to be the first pasuk of Shema, but he says in the final paragraph there, that's for Shachrit and Mincha. About Tfilat Arvit, who reshut, but Marav, which is only voluntary, even though all of Israel we've accepted upon ourselves Marav as an obligation, who accepted it upon themselves? Who daven Marav throughout history? The men. Nonetheless, Hanashim lo kiblu aleihem. V'ruban en mitpalim arvit. Most women do not daven Marav. Utfilat musafim and musaf there's a machloket. It's the machloket about musaf. But ultimately, what does the Mishnah Berurah concede? That women should really be davening 2 tefillot every day. They should be davening Shachrit and Mincha. And there was this Magen Avraham, but he says that Magen Avraham is only like the Rambam. Nonetheless, Minhag Yisrael for many generations was like this Magen Avraham, just to daven 1 tefillah a day, even not a fixed Amida, but to have some sort of bakashot harachamim. But the Mishnah Berurah himself says women, strictly speaking, should be davening 2 tefillot. If we're looking over the page in source 19, it quotes the Rab Halberstam, the Divrei Yatziv, Kloisenberger Rebbe, who basically says that he gives a suggestion as to why it is women were not obligated in tefillah according to the Magen Avraham. Why did Chazal keep them davening once a day according to the Magen Avraham and not 2? So first he suggests, I'm just going to, if you see source 19, I'm just going to, due to time, just go to the bold. You see the bold in the first bit of source 19. The first suggestions he gives is Shenashim sheyesh lehem banim ketanim v'tipulam aleihem. When they've got small children at home, they've got to look after. Chashishu, that Chazal were concerned she'alidei tfilatam lo yechlu l'tapel b'hem kara'oi. Chazal were concerned they wouldn't be able to care for the children properly. V'havei ka'osek b'mitzvah pater min ha'mitzvah v'gam drashat and also because she's got the needs of a husband to look after and everything like that. So the Divrei Yatziv wants to say that seeing as women who attend basically looking after children at home, osek b'mitzvah pater min ha'mitzvah. Since they're already busy looking after the family, that's what exempts them. But he says that doesn't make sense. Why? Because the Gemara doesn't make a distinction between if you've got little kids at home or not. The Gemara just says in general. So he says, Achal zeh yesh laha'ir, but this you've got a question. Just it says they're obligated, but there without saying who. Right? How can we do this based on our own assessment, basically? Gemara didn't make this discrepancy explicitly. So he gives a different justification as to why the Magen Avraham says what he says. I'll skip down to the next bold. But I'll call panim, but nonetheless, says the Divrei Yatziv, yesh smach gadol anashim bezman hazeh. There's good support for women nowadays. There's a halacha of yimodet atzmo sheyachol lachaven. You've got to assess yourself. Are you able to have kavan? And it could be that the assumption is that women who have got kids and things at home are not able to daven properly. And if that's what exempts them from tefillah. They're not in that framework where yimodet atzmo sheyachol lachaven, that they're able to concentrate on tefillah. And as a result, Chazal exempted them from this. And that's what he goes on to say there. He says, I'll just skip to the end of that paragraph. This is why women don't daven regularly. This is what they relied on. Only when they actually have free time, when they're able to, they could daven. I believe that's the truth. That's what the Kloisenberger Rebbe argued, the Divrei Yatziv. And therefore, sorry, not all correct, not all women to fit that description. But he said because they are often busy, therefore they're exempt. But the implication is that otherwise one should pass like the Mishnah Berurah and they should be doing Shacharit. Someone who doesn't have kids to look after, a woman should be davening Shacharit and Mincha, rather than relying on the Magen Avraham. This is true. I've just got an eye on the time. The Piskei Tshuva here in source, no, we're good. Piskei Tshuva here in source 20 discusses that women can rely, if they really want, on this Magen Avraham. So just 1 second. I made a mistake there. Skipped a page. We go back. So he says that they can, if they want, they can rely on this. I lost it. 1 sec. Yeah, no, just my page jumped. Yeah, in source 20. So we just saw source 20, and okay, here we go. Yeah, source 20. So let's see the Piskei Tshuva inside then. It says, so he ultimately does paskin in Piskei Tshuva that women who want to rely on Magen Avraham and just do one short filler every day have what to rely on. Source 20. Meaning from previous generations, the Gedolim have always paskin. A woman who's not got her own time on her own hands, like lihit panot to be available, lihit palel keseder tefillah, the matinut v'shvadat to daven properly in a calm and composed manner. Ki truda be'inei habayit, she's busy at home of a gidol yiladeh with the kids. She's busy basically bringing in a living, earning a living. Such a woman risha'it lismoch al Magen Avraham is allowed to rely on the Magen Avraham. Listabek tefillah k'tzara pam achat bayom to do one short own version of davening a day. Hakolel it, but it's got to include 3 things. Bakasha, shevach, v'hodeh lekolosh baruch hu pam achat bayom. So you're still going to have the 3 parts. It's got to be some shevach, some bakasha, and hodaya to Hashem. And that's what he says. And he actually adds here in brackets, and even brachas in the morning kind of does that. The Tama is up boke adds od kodem achilata. Especially she says this in the morning before she eats. But she should really ideally say the first pasuk of Shema as well. Dahainu ubaruch Shem, okay, and Baruch Shem, kedei lekabel al malchut Shemayim, right? Because she should be makabel al malchut Shemayim every day, even though she's strictly speaking exempt from Shema. But when she has her own schedule, when she's not got kids at home, when she has her control of her time, it's not going to come at the expense of the family, or the needs of the home, which she's got to do. Then she should daven shacharit and mincha. So a woman can rely on the Magen Avraham, but if she's got a busy household, but otherwise she should really be doing more. And about such a woman, she should be davening 2 tefillah. And at the end, he says, it's enough for just to say Amida and brachas alone. But ideally, a woman who's not busy, even if it's only rarity, she should do 2 tefillot that day. But a woman who doesn't have time, she's got kids at home, she can rely on the Magen Avraham if she wants to. Now remember, the Magen Avraham said that, but the Mishnah Berurah disagreed. Mishnah Berurah seemed to say a woman has to say 2 tefillot a day, right? But look at the following source here. It's fascinating. Even though that's what the Mishnah Berurah paskend, his son says that's not what his mother did. I.e., the Mishnah Berurah's wife, the Chafetz Chaim's wife, didn't do this. We look at source 21 here. It's the Sichot Chafetz Chaim. It's recorded by the Chafetz Chaim's son. He records the following story. He says, even though it's hilarious, even though in the Mishnah Berurah he said, yeah, you've got to daven twice a day. you've got to daven twice a day. He says that's not what my mother, the Mishnah Berurah's wife, did. Look at source 21. It says, Imizal, my mother, blessed memory, kimat v'lo hitpalala kol zman shelo yatzanu mitachat yedeha. My mother never davened whenever we were in her care, i.e., whenever we were little children. But Amrali, when she would say to me, Ki avi pitra mizeh, that my father told her she was exempt from it. Mishum she oseket begidul baneha, but she's busy raising the children. So even though the Mishnah Berurah writes what he writes in the Mishnah Berurah, his son says that's not what the Mishnah Berurah paskened for his own wife. That when she had little kids at home, it was enough. She was exempt from any sort of formal tefillah, and enough just to do this sort of quasi tefillah once a day. It just goes to show you it's always the way that you have the rabbi gives a shiur and tells you, but ultimately it's not really up to him what goes on in the house. We can talk from personal experience. That you give a shiur on one thing, but certain rules in the that you don't have a say on. You have a say on what everyone else in the community does, but not what's going on in your own house necessarily. And that's really what we see from here. That but more than that, she says that this is what the Chafetz Chaim himself paskened for her in the first place. We'll just end off on the time. So we see for Ashkenazim though, if there's the Magen Avraham to rely on, perhaps even the Mishnah Berurah concedes it, or for his own wife at least, he surrendered and said that one tefillah a day is enough. But otherwise, really, a woman should be doing Shacharit and Mincha, although it would seem she's exempt from Mariv. When it comes to Sephardi Psakim here, Rabbi Abba Shaul, he seems to say that women are obligated to do Shacharit and Mincha if they have time. In source 22, he says, Nashim chayavot litpalel b'chol yom tefillat Shacharit u'tefillat Mincha. Women, so he's talking about Sephardi women, because he's Sephardi, should daven Shacharit Mincha every day. He says they should also daven Musaf. There's a machloket regarding women's obligation in Musaf. Tefillah Arvit ain't but they don't have to do Mariv. Nonetheless, it's best to daven Mariv as well. And in the footnotes there, he says, nonetheless, a woman who's looking after children full time, has no time to daven, is totally exempt from tefillah. She's like busy with one mitzvah and therefore is exempt. And therefore, doing this quasi birkat to shachar would be enough. So he said women should daven, but again, he does employ the Magen Avraham at the end. Rav Avadia, which we'll end off now in source 23 in his Yabia Omer, is more lenient and seems to imply that all women can daven once a day. That's enough. He says in source 23 in the Yabia Omer, Ha'ikar kedivrei ha'achronim, Mazal, the main psak is like the later achronim, Sheladat harifa harama b'maran, dai lenashim b'tefillah achat. It's enough that women daven one amida, shehi min haTorah, because we said according to the Rambam that is the Torah obligation. And of course, Rav Avadia says that's what the Shulchan Aruch applied. And of course, Rav Avadia paskins exactly like the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch paskin that way, and therefore that's what he rules. V'chein dat bala eshkol Rabbi Yishai mitzarani v'Rashba. He says that's what they all paskin. V'kvar katavti came b'shut Yabia Omer v'chein ikar. That is what we do. He disagrees with the previous source. And therefore, Rav Avadia paskin, the Sephardi women, one tefillah a day for all women is enough, like the Rambam, which he says is also the psak of Shulchan Aruch. And as we know by now, Rav Avadia doesn't move from what he thinks is the psak of the Shulchan Aruch. So that's a little bit of background about obligation of tefillah, machloket between Rambam and Ramban, deraita or is it Rabbanan? Also the question about this minhag, this long-standing minhag, which the Magen Avraham justifies of women perhaps only davening once a day, but when they have more time on their hands, maybe they should be doing more. And we will end there. I will remind you all there's a lunch and learn tomorrow with Rabbi Kimchi at 1 o'clock, and also he'll be giving in the city on Thursday. Also, there's a panel on Thursday evening, which you're all invited to. Dr. Michael Kaufman will be interviewing Rabbi Kimchi about the building up of their community in London from scratch. And that's plenty to look forward to. And Erev Tov.
Thank you very much.